If you've joined us, I'm just giving a few more seconds to make sure we're all synced up and people are here. Well, hello. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Kathryn Lopez from the National Review Institute, and I'm here with Dan Darling, who is the author of A Way with Words, Using Our Online Conversations for Good. This is not in the screen, though. And The Characters of Christmas. And we're going to talk a little bit about both of those. But Dan, I'm so excited to have the opportunity to talk to you before Christmas here. And I put St. Paul in the background because you remind me a little bit of him, how you're out in the world really trying to use scripture and use the Christian faith to help lead the conversations, and rather than take the faith and try to manipulate it into whatever, political, ideological, etc. molds that you want, as we often see. You're taking it and saying, all right, who are we supposed to be in the midst of this chaos? And thank you for doing that. You even do it on social media, which is, wow, miraculous.
Well, thank you for that. And it's just an honor to be talking to National Review. I have been reading National Review since I was in high school. We were talking beforehand, but I was one of those kids that was reading it in high school and have just always been formed and shaped by this great publication and movement. And so grateful for the work of National Review and just really helping us to think through so many things. But it's great to be here with you, Kayla. And I've tried to, I know it's just a crazy time, and I don't know that I model it perfectly and as well as I can on social media. But one of the things I just have been thinking about in the last couple of years, one of the reasons I wrote the book was, we live in a time where it's never been easier to communicate. It's never been easier to publish, right? With a few strokes of the keyboard or a few taps of our thumbs, we can basically send a message to the world. And I don't think we're going to go backward. I don't see us going back to the 1950s or suddenly becoming Amish or something like that. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, how are we going to manage this that we have? I mean, in some ways it's been good because it is kind of elevated voices that maybe weren't heard before. It's flattened, I think, the access to power and to be able to speak out. But then in other ways, it's, there's our perverse incentives on social media, and it has kind of divided us in ways. And I think even more so this year, in a COVID year, because we have lost a lot of the kind of formal and informal in-person gatherings that we take for granted. Right. The fundraising banquets, the parent-teacher things, the Sunday school, the Lions Club meetings, all these little things, big and small, where we see
even
people
family
get-togethers, right? So instead, we're shut up inside, and more of our conversations are mediated through screens and through technology. And so instead of discussing things over coffee, we're fighting with people on Facebook.
Right.
So I think that's contributed as well. So I think the question for us as Christians is, how do we steward this moment well? How do we have a presence on social media that is redemptive? Obviously, we need to be prophetic. We need to speak up for people who can't speak for themselves. We need to speak up for the vulnerable and all those things. But at the same time, how do we do this in a way that recognizes the dignity of people we disagree with? So those are some of the things that were kind of going through my head as I thought about writing this book.
Well, one of the things that strikes me is this book that you've done on Christmas that came out last year. It's sort of the perfect meditation to get us to the place where we can do what you were just describing. The humility, as you write about in the book, the humility of the scene, the Christmas scene, the family, it's not social distancing, and that is good. I'm not knocking any of the preventative measures that we're taking. Believe me, I live in New York. I know COVID is a real thing, but everything that you were just talking about that we're missing, if we really, really meditate on the characters of Christmas as you write about, it gives us an opportunity, as you also write about in both these books. We need to take a few steps back. We need to have some quiet and rest and silence and obviously prayer. And people don't know how to do that anymore, particularly this year when all of our lives, it seems to be on screens.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I mean, Christmas, I look forward to Christmas every year because I just love Christmas, and I don't think you can start it too soon. Um, this year particularly, though, I think we need Advent more because of the longing, the sorrow, the sadness, the losses, the expectation, and Christmas brings all of that. And the fact that Jesus came into a world as broken and cynical and difficult as the world we live in today. People were cynical. The people of God believed the promise of a Messiah, of a coming Redeemer, but they couldn't visualize it. They every day would get up and see that Roman flag flying high as a symbol of their occupation. They had not heard from, there had not been, angels and prophets, meaningful communication from God to them in centuries. And so they prayed and they believed this, but they didn't know if it would come. And then you consider the people that God chooses to use as part of the Christmas story. Mary and Joseph were a peasant couple with very little agency and power, announcing to the shepherds who were not well regarded. People like Simeon and Anna, who are witnesses, who are part of the story, who are really nobodies. And there's actually a contrast in the Gospels between these kinds of people and the powerful, Herod and the religious leaders who didn't recognize Jesus. And so I think this season, really, we can bring our sorrows and our lament to this season. So I like to tell people, whether you're Andy Williams and you feel it's the best time of year, or you're Merle Haggard and you're trying to make it through December, Christmas really speaks to the moment we are in right now.
Well, that point about Merle Haggard, I think we have to be sensitive and aware more now than ever to the suffering of people who feel alone. People who were not stuck in a house full of people. People who were stuck in a house full of people who feel like they're just overwhelmed and abandoned by the church, the government, whatever the feelings are. Lots of people are feeling them. And how do we help walk with people this year in a new and renewed and committed way? Really look to our neighbors, whether they're next door or they're the friend we haven't talked to in a year because we, normally maybe we're flying out to Washington or wherever,
right.
And we're not doing it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something you mentioned earlier too about stillness and quietness, and I think of the story of Zechariah in the temple, and the angel Gabriel visits him, and he's just doesn't know how to process this, right? They've been praying for a child, him and his wife, unable to have one. They've been praying for a Messiah, and none of that looks possible. And then when it actually comes, in that moment, Gabriel comes, he doesn't know how to process it. He doesn't know how to believe. There's such a thick layer of cynicism. I think a lot of people have that today. But what's interesting is that he is silenced for 9 months. Sometimes God has to silence us in order so we can hear him speak, right? And actually, I think in many ways, even though I'm a proud Baptist and a proud Protestant, our Catholic friends have a better concept of this sometimes, of meditation and silence, and particularly in this noisy world. So I think we need to really take time this Christmas to do that, to settle down, to put away our devices, to sort of unplug, which is hard for me to do. And then I also think when you're talking about the sorrow and the pain that people have and the distrust, we're living in things just feel heavy. I don't know about you, but everything feels heavy. We lost a close friend a couple of weeks ago to COVID. We've lost family members to it. We've seen people lose jobs, and everybody I talk to, and I don't know about you, Kathryn, everybody I talk to feels the same way. Everybody's dealing with crisis. Everyone is struggling. Kids are struggling because they're not in school. There's just a heaviness, a profound heaviness. And I think as Christians, we can take that to Jesus. We can, even though we have joy, we have genuine joy because Christ has come. We believe it, and that he is renewing and restoring the world. And he's going to one day come back to finish what he started. We are in the in-between time, and it's good and right for us to lament and be sad over the brokenness that we see. We see a tradition of this in the scriptures, in church history, of lament. You have a whole Old Testament book called Lamentations that's written for this purpose. The Psalms are filled with lament. Jesus, when he is looking at the corpse of his friend Lazarus, the Bible says he weeps and he's angered within himself at what the curse of sin has wrought, that death is the enemy. We can be angry at it. We can lament it. We don't have to paper over our feelings with this kind of fake holly jolly, Christmas. We can feel those things. It's okay to do that. Paul, St. Paul, who you have behind you, said in, I believe, 1 Corinthians, he said, we are sorrowful yet rejoicing. So there's a joy, but it's in the midst of this sorrow. And I think that's perfectly okay. I think for us to feel when we're walking alongside our friends and family who are feeling it, to just be present and feel it with them.
I do think one of the mercies in this time is an opportunity to really appreciate what joy is in this world. I have been fascinated over the years with, especially at this time of year, Dunkin' Donuts will have joy on their cups, and you see joy everywhere, but it's not this Pollyannish thing for, the angelic people who somehow can have all the joy in the world. No, the people who are joyful. You mentioned Catholics, so I'll take that and run with it. The Sisters of Life. Whenever I post pictures of the Sisters of Life on Twitter, oh my goodness, the reaction I get from people. But I think that people think that they're this exotic breed of human being who somehow, only have joy. No, they struggle too. They have sorrow too. They've made a commitment, obviously, in a different way than most. But they serve women who are in desperate situations. They know suffering, believe me. And I think if we're honest with ourselves about that and with others, we really are more credible witnesses,
We really are. And by the way, I felt like it was my duty to commend Catholics because on the wall, on my library behind me, I have both Calvin and Luther volumes. So in the interest of Christian unity here, I felt like it was only the right thing to do.
I appreciate
but yeah, you're right. I mean, joy there. What I love about this season, Kathryn, is just the language of Christmas, of Advent. When you listen to the hymns, the Christmas hymns that we cherish, they contain that rich, robust theology that allows us to both rejoice and lament at the same time. They accurately describe God breaking into a world that is broken, that is hard and difficult and messed up like ours is. And I think that's why it's amazing to me that even in this increasingly secular age, even in an increasingly secular West, the world is still pausing to at least in some ways acknowledge that Christ was born. I mean, not everyone's a believer. Not everyone even believes the story, but our calendar is still oriented around that. Our lives are still in some way oriented around that. The music of the season is still being played, even sung by people who may not even profess faith, it's played in stores and in all over, the world in a kind of ironic way. So the message is still getting out there. And so I think in 2020, we're appreciating, hopefully, the themes of Christmas more.
And that is a thing that can both distress me and give me hope, that we do have this secular connection, right, to the Christian faith, and yet do people know what it is? Do even people who profess faith really know what is going on there? But it does give me hope because God can work with that, and the more that we do try to be credible witnesses. You mentioned before that, you don't know if you're the model or you do it perfectly, but it's clear that you're trying, and trying your best with God's grace. And that's what we need to be, and encourage one another on that. You mentioned from the start of the Way with Words book, healing and wisdom, right, go together. And it's very hard sometimes, if your day is screens and things coming at you, it can be overwhelming, and wisdom is like the furthest thing from what you're getting at, and that makes wisdom seem really far off.
Yeah. And I think, when it comes to the way we interact on social media, there's a few things we need to think about. I think, first of all, we need to ask ourselves, do I understand, do we understand that we're in public? There's this weird, irony and dichotomy that I think we hold, that we know we're in public. And so a lot of our social media things are performative, trying to win favor from a tribe or from a group of people. And yet we almost forget we're in public because we're behind a keyboard. So we don't face the kind of social consequences, if you will, of some of the things we say. Like, we would not say it to someone or about someone if we were in person with them. So I think we need to remember we're in public. So even if, let's say you only have, 100 followers on Twitter, which is pretty easy to do. Imagine a room of 100 people, and would you be talking like that to those people? Now imagine you have 1,000 followers. That's a pretty big auditorium, or 10,000. That's a minor league baseball stadium. Some people 100,000, million. I mean, you're talking football stadiums and beyond. So imagine that. And then we also need to think that the people we're interacting with are human beings. Mm-hmm. That person on the other side of Twitter or Facebook is a human being made in the image of God. They may be wrong. I may disagree with them. They may hold an opinion that I actually think is wrong morally, but we should not reduce them to that opinion. They're whole people. They're more than their bad opinions or their hot takes. So remembering their humanity, I think, helps moderate and soften our responses. And I think part of wisdom is saying, there's a conversation happening here, or there's a news story happening here. Do I need to weigh in on this? Is this, just because it's happening doesn't mean I have to have an opinion about it. Do I know enough about it, right? 20 years ago, Kathryn, I didn't know what some random person 5 states away thought about a major global crisis, but now we feel like I've got to say something. Silence is violence and all that. And I always actually get a little frustrated when I see people say, why are conservatives silent? Or why are evangelical leaders silent? Or why are Catholic leaders silent? And I'm like, maybe they're not being silent, but they're visiting someone in the hospital right now, or they're talking to their board, or they're writing something or doing something. So this idea that you have to be as mad as I am at the same time as I am about the same thing as I am on the same platform as I am is ridiculous. I mean, so I think we have to just say, I don't have to speak to this, or maybe I should, maybe I feel compelled to. That's great, but we don't have to have a take on everything. And then I also think we just got to be wise about, do I know everything there's to know about the situation? We've seen a lot of stories, a lot of developments in the last few years where everybody jumped on a story, everybody was sort of crushing somebody for some perceived bad thing on social, only to find out 24 hours later that we didn't have the full story,
Right.
but we had ruined someone's life. And so I just think we have to be wise with all that. I actually think we can have substantive conversations online and even disagreements, if we keep in mind that the other person is a human being, that we're in public, that we're modeling. Those of us who have any measure of platform or leadership or influence, big or small, have to understand that we're not just saying things, we're modeling for the people who follow us what it looks like to have public discourse. So when I'm responding to someone who has a bad opinion with a counter argument or a counter idea, which is not a bad thing, I think you can have good debates. We need to not just see ourselves as someone behind a computer, but imagine two people on a debate stage with thousands of people watching. Our conversations would be different. I always try to, even if I'm disagreeing with someone, I try to keep it at the human level and, end well, right? You can say to somebody, I don't land where you land on this, but we've had a good conversation and you raised some good points or something like that. You can say that to just about anybody, I think. So I just think we have to think through good stewardship of our online words.
And do you have success stories on Twitter engaging people who disagree with you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've had people that I disagree with and have had back and forth disagreements. And then sometimes I'll take it privately and say, hey, let's talk about this. I'm not sure if we're understanding each other. And, we sort of end with, okay, you know what? Like, we may not agree, but I kind of see where the other person's coming from. I mean, I do think there's always a portion of people who you're never going to,
right, sure.
There's a small handful of folks who are not in good faith. And I don't know that we should engage people who are not engaging in good faith. Mm-hmm. People who are trolls or people you just, you don't have to respond to those folks. But I think a lot of people you can have these kinds of disagreements and model it, and then we have to ask ourselves, is this the best format? Is social media the best format for this? Maybe it is. Maybe there's a better format where we write a long essay, or maybe we need to take it privately. I just think those are conversations worth having,
And I do like you, Dan. I think there's a point in both. I find that people, this is not breaking news, have short attention spans. So reading the whole article isn't necessarily going to happen. On the other hand, if you catch people on Twitter, maybe they are curious and maybe they do want more, and then the article exists, so you can lead them there. I think, both are important.
Yeah, reading the whole article to me is huge. When I talk about news, because people say, how do we read the news? I mean, I think number one, read articles, not headlines, because headline writers are paid to get you to click, to get you to share. And it may not convey the meaning of the whole. Read articles, not headlines, and then read across a wide variety of perspectives. So we're getting the whole story. That might mean we slow down and don't post something right away, and that's okay. The world will actually keep spinning if it doesn't have my take right now. I think we also should question our own biases. So when a story comes across that really confirms what I think to be true about someone I don't agree with, we need to question our biases, right? Is this story really true, or do I just want it to be true? Now sometimes those two things match up, and the people we disagree with really are bad people, or really, there's things that, okay. But I think we need to question our own biases, because we get into these kind of echo chambers of information, these bubbles of information where we only want to hear news that affirms what we already believe. And I think that's dangerous, because it may give us the story, but not the full story. Right? And I think this exists both on the left and the right. I think this exists on Twitter and Facebook. I think there's two bubbles. What I think is interesting is that both bubbles think the other people are in a bubble. You know what I mean? So conspiracy theories thrive in places like Facebook, where there's a deep distrust of the elite, which has been earned, I think, in some respects because of the institutional failures across the board in the last few decades and all that. So wherever you have whether you have a low degree of trust, you have a high degree of belief in conspiracies and all that. So I think those two things are related. But then you also have on Twitter, where I think, it's fair to say that most of us who work in the kind of professional class, the journalists and thinkers and thought leaders and all that gather, that can be a bubble too. Very, very, very removed from the kind of average, everyday working class, regular people, right? I'm amazed at the conversations we have on Twitter and the controversies on the ground with people who don't spend time there. It's just like it's like two different worlds. The things that people are freaking out about on Twitter as if it's an existential crisis. You talk to people at the barbershop or at my church and my small group or in the community, and they don't know what happened, and B, they're not freaking out. So I do think we have to live in both of these worlds. Peggy Noonan talked about this really well in her last column when she talked about the shutdowns, between the kind of laptop class and the working class. And I'm saying that as a charter member of what I would call the laptop class, right? But we have to recognize the bubbles and read across these places so that we get a full picture of what's going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I frequently like you not telling people that they need to throw out their phone, because obviously there are advantages to having it. But yeah, the number of times that I realized that I am upset about something, like so distressed about something that most people have no idea about. And guess what? Their life is perfectly fine that they don't know about it. We obviously, we want to have knowledge and facts, but as you write about in your book, at a certain point, yeah, you can just walk away. I think a good rule, you talk about the importance of having spiritual disciplines. If you are getting so upset about the last thing Donald Trump tweeted, or what the last thing Joe Biden said, or whatever it is, maybe take a few steps back. That's when you go volunteer or have a hobby, or talk to someone you love about real things. How are you doing, really? I think one of the signs of our culture, when we used to meet people, we'd say, how are you? But we didn't really actually wait for the answer. It was just sort of in place of hello. Well, how about actually asking people how they are and listening, again, rather than getting upset about whatever we're frenzying about right now.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I like to say that your offline life, the quality of your offline life determines the quality of your online life. And if you have a good centered offline life, if you practice the spiritual disciplines, if you go to church regularly, if you have good relationships with people, that I think moderates your online life. What makes me a little nervous is there is a generation of people that live online. What do we call this? Very, very online people, that they're formed and catechized in ways they don't see by the online world. And that kind of shapes them. And it makes me a little bit worried because, and I can always tell someone who is like this, because every point of conversation is some controversy. Did you see what so-and-so this and that? And then I think you seek affirmation from from certain tribes online. And I think that is really, really harmful. In the book, I talk a lot about identity, and, I'm trying to get underneath the things, the reasons we do the things we do online. So I'm not just saying, hey, everybody be nice, which I am saying that, but I'm saying, why are we doing the things we're doing? And part of the reason I think we are doing is because sometimes the digital world allows us to curate a version of ourselves that we might feel is lacking in real life. Mm-hmm. So I don't know about you, Kathryn, but some of the most pugilistic people online, I meet them in real life and they're very calm, very meek.
Yes.
And there's something to that, that we're able to curate a version of ourselves we find lacking. So maybe you've never been someone who's been considered in your life courageous or funny or whatever. You're able to kind of curate a version of ourselves to get affirmation from a crowd to feel good. Or it could be a mom who has to curate this version of this perfect mom, or you're a dad curating a version of this workout guy, or someone who's super thoughtful. Whatever that is, I think that's what's happening. A lot of this stuff is performative. And especially I always wonder, what's going on with this person? You're seeing this behavior online. What's going on? And I think the answer, not to be cliche, but as a Christian, is, if we understand that we're known by God and we know God, that gives us a security to not have to play, act, and perform for temporary affirmation. If we know who we are, we can be confident. And that actually frees us to be the kind of person online and offline that we were intended to be. I read a great book by a neurosurgeon it's called The Soul of Shame, Kurt Thompson. So good. And he talked about that. And that really has helped me. So I think, again, a lot of the things we do could be actually performative, that we're trying to keep up appearances for a group or for a crowd. If you think about it, social media has given everybody a platform and a stage, that we're always performing. We're always in public. We're always managing a profile. And I don't know that that's healthy, to be honest, for all of us.
So how should we be looking at our relationship to social media?
I think we just got to see it for what it is, mm-hmm. that can be a very useful tool for a lot of things. I have been exposed to a lot of really good things that have shaped me because of social media. I've met people, made friendships, read incredible articles, and were able to get news and find out about good books and good podcasts and good conferences. And it's also mobilized movements for good, right? That people, however you feel about the Me Too movement, and I think there's been a lot of excesses of it, but there's also been an aspect where it has exposed a lot of abuse by people in positions of power that may have never been able to be exposed without the flattening of social media. You're able to coalesce movements. We both, I'm sure, have had people who have suffered some awful tragedy, and we can raise money for them. Right. I had a friend earlier this year. I didn't know him that well, but he was a close friend of one of my really close friends who died in a tragic auto accident. And we were able to raise money for his widow and their children. And people were donating. They've never met him, because we were able to share and spread this. And it was just, we kept having to raise the limit of donations. And it was just amazing. And so social media and the internet is doing extraordinary good. I think it's spreading the gospel around the world. It's spreading good ideas around the world. So Christians should not be anti-technology and anti this. It's part of the creation mandate in Genesis that, technology is an act of taking the raw materials and making something with them and innovating. We have an innovative God, and so we're made in his image to innovate. But yet we also have to see the way that in a fallen world it can be corrupted. Right. And there can be perverse incentives. I think if we understand the perverse incentives of social media, the fact that the algorithms reward conflict, that the algorithms reward extremism, we can be countercultural. We don't have to live by those rules, right? And so any way that we can spread joy, that we can use these platforms to highlight good works of art and good books and good content, also to encourage people. Maybe you read an article, you read something, or a journalist is doing some good work, or you can respond publicly and just thank them and commend them for the work that they're doing. You can send an email or a message to someone and encourage them. So I think we just need to ask ourselves, I can't control what everybody else is doing. I can't control what the platforms are doing, but I can control what I do with my voice and my influence. And so who can I speak up for? What issues can I raise? Who can I encourage? What good things can I share for the benefit of others? I think those are the questions we should ask ourselves.
I love the point about encouragement. Years ago, a priest friend of mine said, if you ever hear or see the right thing, say thank you, because odds are like your pastor only hears the complaints. And so if you deliver some marvelous sermon one day, to say thank you, and the same is true of writers, but the same is true in all of human life, right? We tend to speak up when we're mad or we see something wrong, but I think it's especially important for people we don't agree with all the time. I think I would like to think that Nick Kristof in the New York Times got a lot of thank yous for his Pornhub piece from Christians, from pro-lifers who probably don't agree with even every sentence in that piece. But the work he did was so important. And I find that's frequently the case with him. There'll always be some line I disagree with, but his heart is in the right place, and he's trying to do good in the world, even if we disagree on even some fundamental issues.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And Christoph's piece is such a great point, because there's a lot of times that I read Kristof and he frustrates me because I'm conservative. I mean, gosh, I've been reading National Review since high school. Of course, I'm conservative. But then I do see a lot of times where he really patiently tries to understand conservatives, right. Where he will interview Christians, people of faith around Christmas time. He's interviewed Tim Keller, he's interviewed others. And he will.
Ramesh Ponnuru wrote a corner post against one of his columns a couple of months ago, and he retweeted it. God bless him.
Yes. I mean, that kind of stuff. But then he does this incredible work on this just awful exploitation from Pornhub. And, conservatives could have written about that. National Review could have written about it, and probably has, thankfully. But for him to use his platform right. to readers that might not know about it is just extraordinary work. And I think we should commend him. And you highlighted something that I think is really important for us to do, is that encourage people and publicly commend people, especially when it's something good from someone that you otherwise disagree with. Mm-hmm. And I try to do this, I don't agree with a lot of people, but when they do something that's really good, just to say, this was really good, or I really appreciate this here, or thank you for this, or to do that, I think not only is encouraging and promotes civility, but it also models for those following you how to do that, right? Mm-hmm. So, I expect that I will disagree with President Biden on a lot of things, most things. But there will be times when he will do things that are good. And I think it's okay to say, I really appreciated he did this. I really appreciated he said this. I think it's important for us to find those moments to do that. And this is just not left, right. It's across the board, right? I mean, there's even divisions within conservatives about different issues. But when you are able to kind of highlight something from someone that you otherwise disagree with, I think it just kind of neutralizes some of the hardened divisions. And I think and I also think we should try to surprise people. So if you follow me, I'm very conservative, Protestant Reformed Christian, but I want to surprise people sometimes by praising things that are outside of my tribe or things like that. And I think that's good, not to be too predictable, if that makes sense.
Right, right, right. Which actually reminds me, I wanted to bring this up. Have you read Pope Francis's letter on the year of St. Joseph that came out earlier this month?
I have not. I really need to read it though.
You do. There's so much that gels, as you might expect, with your book on Christmas. And one section I was reading earlier today, I just love, even through Joseph's fears, God's will, his history, and his plan were at work. I think this is such an important point for us living through this year. Joseph then teaches us that faith in God includes believing that he can work even through our fears, our frailties, and our weaknesses. He also teaches us that amid the tempests of life, we must never be afraid to let the Lord steer our course. At times we want to be in complete control, yeah, yet God always sees the bigger picture. There's so much in there that I think you'll find so beautiful.
That's such a great word. It really is. And this year is teaching us that. There's a lot to complain about, a lot that divides us, a lot to be angry about, a lot to speak out about, which I think we should all do. But me and my wife keep just going back to, what is God teaching us this year? What does he want us to do? For many people, everything has been pulled out from under them. The things that we are accustomed to, that we took for granted, that there was no decision process to have. Going to church, when I talk to pastors around the country, it's been such a hard year leading because, there's already a lot to leadership and preparing sermons and leading their people and all that. But the actual day of church was kind of, every week you did it. Right. Now that's a major thing. How do we do it? Right. Distancing, do we meet? Do we do online? Going to the grocery store, going to a restaurant, like all these things suddenly are either taken, like the visits with people are either taken away or disrupted. And I've been reading through the Old Testament, and God often introduced disruption into the lives of people in order for them to repent and reflect and turn toward him. And I think what you read from Pope Francis is good. Like Joseph's life was completely turned upside down. He was signing up for a life he didn't imagine that would be hard and difficult. And yet he had to trust that the Lord is in control, that God is in control of all things. I've been telling a lot of people and telling myself that the things that shake us in 2020 don't shake heaven. Right. God is not shaken by what shakes us. And so I think that kind of level of trust is really important.
When you think about St. Joseph, as you were saying, he could have been totally overwhelmed by fear, like this story doesn't make any sense, first of all, in the ways of the world. And there is a point where, it's an act of the will. You have to just make a decision. I am going to trust God. And I came to that point in a real serious way just in the last month, because a dear friend of mine died, and he's left these really young children behind, and it was leukemia. It wasn't COVID. And it doesn't make any sense. He was, in the perfect position, and, was really doing good in the world. And at some point, you just have to say, no, I trust you, God. I really actually do believe what I say. I may not be feeling it, and I may not feel it for a long, but I know it's true.
Yeah. And what that looked like for Joseph, when we think of trusting God, we think this big, huge, momentous thing, like with a halo over our head and a big commitment and a signing ceremony.
Right.
For Joseph, what it looked like was getting up and doing the next right hard thing in front of him. So Joseph, when the angel comes to him and tells him that the baby with Mary is of God, that he should not put her away. Let's back up here. The Bible describes Joseph as a righteous man. And we see that played out. When he first hears the news about Mary, which, by the way, the text is so understated. It just says when he heard these things, and you're like, how did that happen? What was that conversation like with Mary and him? He chose the harder option for him, the one that would protect Mary more. He could have divorced her completely and publicly shamed her, which was common because she had a child with, out of wedlock, so to speak. Or he could privately put her away and protect her, but then take on shame himself. He chose that one. So he did the next right thing. And then the angel comes to him. And we don't know how long that period was between the angel coming to Mary and the angel coming to Joseph. Could have been weeks, sleepless nights, everything. The angel comes to him and says, no, marry her. Marry this, your fiance, if you will. And so he does. He does the next right hard thing, even though that would bring shame. Then they have to go from Nazareth to Bethlehem because of Caesar issuing this decree and this new tax. Now, keep in mind, they were already overtaxed. As a conservative, I don't like being overtaxed, right? He layers on this new tax. I'm sure everybody's frustrated, but, you're supposed to obey and pay the tax. So he goes back to his hometown. It's a hard journey, goes back to Bethlehem. He doesn't know that all this personal hard story is part of God's plan and the prophecy that foretold that the baby would be born in Bethlehem. So he does that next right thing. And then when he's told by the angel to go to Egypt because he has to flee Herod, who is going after baby boys in Bethlehem, he does that. And that's a hard journey. So you see with him, and like with us, sometimes faith is just, what is the next thing God is asking me to do in this moment?
Right.
What is the next hard thing? And trusting that in my little tiny world, in my crisis, that my crisis is part of a larger story that God is telling in the world.
Right.
And that's what I think the example of Joseph just gives for us.
And sometimes it really is a crisis, but sometimes that crisis just needs a little perspective, right? As well.
Yeah, it really does. And again, it doesn't mean, trust, again, doesn't mean that we don't lament and we don't have the range of emotions that God has given us. Again, Jesus at the grave of Lazarus wept and was angry at death. So it doesn't mean we don't have those things. It doesn't mean stoicism. It means, we lament, we don't like it. It doesn't mean we don't fight injustice and we don't speak out and use our voice and our agency to fight injustice or fight bad policy. It doesn't mean we don't stand athwart history and, say no, right? But at the same time, having that trust in the Lord. And this is what I think is important for us, even at election time. One of the things that really is distressing is just how many people on both sides, left and right and everywhere in between, how we are unable to cope with outcomes that we may not like. That instead of saying, okay, we won this election or we lost this election, okay, we did the best we could, we spoke out, we did this and we won or we lost. We're going to accept it because politics is very important. Politics is vital in a republic like ours. We should be involved with it, but it's not ultimate. We can hold it loosely. We ultimately trust that Christ is sovereign, that God is sovereign, and that he holds all things. He's gathering history to himself. And so we work hard, we fight, but then we ultimately trust the Lord. And our hope is not in the next election, even though we want it to turn out a certain way, but our hope is in Christ. And I'm distressed by the amount of people. And I think what's happened, Kathryn, is that as religious fervor has declined, as church attendance has declined, we've replaced religious fervor with political fervor. Politics is the new religion.
Absolutely.
And politics is a useful vehicle for human flourishing, but it makes a poor religion.
Yes.
And our politicians make very poor gods.
Yes.
Our parties make very poor, churches. And so I think we have to put those things in place.
Absolutely. Yesterday, I ran into graffiti on a wall, and it said something to the Joe and Kamala have saved us. Now our country will be saved, and we're united. And like just like that. And it's this bipartisan problem too. I do think that the Barack Obama campaign slogan the first time, "We are the ones we've been waiting for," was perfect in capturing our problem.
Absolutely.
And it's bipartisan. You see it obviously on the right now.
Absolutely. You're absolutely the messianic tones to our politics have really, as you said, I was worried about that with Obama, that just and I understand the historical nature. He was a gifted man and a lot to admire. And I don't even think he necessarily wanted that, because it's something, the messianic expectations for our politicians are not things that they themselves can bear, because they're humans.
Right.
We're only setting them up for disappointment, setting ourselves up for disappointment. And you see a little bit with Trump, that him as savior. And I think it's harmful for our body politic. It's harmful for us personally in our souls. Hopefully with maturity, these things work themselves out. When I was young, idealistic, I kind of did this at times too, right? Like I would do this with some of the people that I admired. And of course, over time, I think the danger is you get idealistic and messianic about your politics, and then you get jaded, and then you get cynical. And then the cynicism is bad too, because nobody's good. Nobody's right. Everyone's a fraud. There's nothing redeeming. And that too keeps us from discerning well what's good and what's bad. So I think when we hold politics loosely for where it is, what it's supposed to do, I think it helps us to do it well, right? Mm-hmm. Like we can do politics well if we know its place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, you mentioned this earlier, and you get at this in the Christmas book, the hiddenness of some of these people who are, quote, nobodies. Nobody's a nobody. Everyone is made in the image and likeness of God, and is as important as the people in the news, and sometimes more so, because the power of the quiet virtue and the quiet heroism that we don't necessarily see on display is just so important. And I think people don't have appreciation for the power of virtue. You don't have to tweet about it. You don't have to, you just do it, live it.
Yeah, I agree. Like the power of personal virtue, which is why when you see someone who exhibits personal virtue, it's so refreshing. Right. And I actually think there's more of this in our country than we give credit to by ordinary people who are not trying to have a platform. When I think about people in our church, that are just ordinary people that love God, love their neighbors, will roll up their sleeves and help anybody. They don't have a platform. They don't write articles. They don't write books. They're not online. Not that anything wrong with that, because that's right. What I do. But they're just good people. And there's a kind of ordinary goodness. But I do think we need to bring back virtue. I think it's interesting to me that at times the secular left and the media has kind of mocked the idea of personal virtue in some ways in politicians who are Christians or who are really devout, who care about their marriages. And I think even people on that side are starting to actually change their views on that and say, maybe we shouldn't have mocked that, because we need that in people, right? Right. As someone once said, I don't know if it was Ross Douthat or someone said, well, if you don't like the religious right, you're going to really not like the non-religious right. Mm-hmm. And I think you could say that about the left too. Like if you don't like the progressive, religious left, you're going to, the secular left is going to be worse. So we need personal virtue in our politics. I think we need people who see public service as a duty and who in their own lives want to be good people who have virtue, and even people we disagree with. I think there's more of that than we want to recognize, but I do think this last era that we've had, sometimes things can get so bad that it's like a mirror to where I think it wakes us up and saying, okay, we need this, we need virtue, we need civility, we need, and if you read American history, that's kind of how we do it. These movements kind of wax and wane. And I actually think below the surface, we've seen a lot of people recognize the need for civility, for virtue, for kindness, for public service in ways that maybe they wouldn't have recognized or took for granted before.
A lot of people, maybe particularly on the right, are allergic though to that word civility, because sometimes it's used or perceived as, so don't argue, don't make an argument, or fall in line, which
Yeah.
obviously we can't do.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And civility does not mean we don't speak out and we don't speak out on this. And I have really two models for that. One is 1 Peter, where he talks about that Christians should have an answer for every person for the hope that lies within us. So speak to the issues of the age, press the gospel into all these things. But then he says, but do it with gentleness and kindness. So there's Peter's idea. And Peter understood this because Peter was prone to speak out of turn and other things like that. But he understood that civility and courage are not enemies, but friends, right? That the loudest person in the room is not the most courageous. You can be brave without typing something in all caps, for instance. So he's a good model. I think a more modern example would be Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King really was prophetic. He pushed us. He spoke tough words that people needed to hear. But if you understand, he always used the language of human dignity. He always appealed to the consciences and to the goodwill of the people that he was even rebuking. And I think that's a good model for us, that we can press into the issues of the age. We can speak up with courage. We should speak out. We should not tire to speak up for the vulnerable and try to shape our country. And yet we can do this in a way that respects the dignity and the worth of the people we disagree with.
What's your best advice? We only have a few minutes left, in really taking the opportunity this Christmas. There's a little bit of Advent left. I say milk every day for for everything, every grace you can get out of it, every reflective moment you can get out of it. How do we take really this opportunity right now to maybe make some changes? To really be more reflective, be living lovingly in the service of God and our neighbor.
Well, I really think this time of year offers us a time to kind of sit and reset things. I would encourage folks to take some time to be still, to be quiet, to read, to reflect, to lament. This has been a hard year to rest. I mean, this has been a hard year, a hard and difficult and extraordinary year. And then also just ask ourselves questions about, what might God be doing for me in this next year? I think the turn of the calendar is a great opportunity to set goals. And I think we need to be a little easier on ourselves in our goal setting this year than we were in previous years, because we've been through so much trauma this year. But asking ourselves, what kind of people do we want to be? What kind of practices do I want to put in place? The turn of the calendar is a great opportunity for that, to say, what habits do I want to build? Our habits really help determine our character. So what are some small things we can build in? Some spiritual disciplines we can add, some reading we can do, some practices in our daily lives that can help form us over the long haul. I think asking those questions, what relationships can we rekindle? Right. I can think of 2 or 3 people that I've said, one of my goals for 21 is to revive that relationship that's gone dormant. Who are some people we need to forgive? What are some relationships we need to mend in 21? And I think, setting a few small personal goals along those lines can really set us up for next year.
And I think too, I walk around the streets of Manhattan now, and constantly thinking, there, but by the grace of God go I, seeing homeless people, the drug addiction, and, thanks be to God, we have what we have. And I think a necessary part of this transition is to look at people who don't have what you have, Joseph is a foster father, bearing that in mind, thinking about, those of us who are having this conversation right now, listening to this conversation, we probably are, in families, kids who aren't, just thinking about people who really do have less than we do in terms of resources and things like that. I think that is a necessary part, because if we were traumatized, think about a kid who is in foster care, and all of these things, I think is very important.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like asking ourselves, where can I give? Where can I invest? Who can I encourage? We may not have a lot of money or time or resources, but who can I bless in a small way? Whose life can I make better? It might be a small business owner that you're going to give them some money to help them get through this time if their restaurant's been shuttered or closed, or it might be a family that is in need, a foster child that needs a home, or a food bank that needs some more resources, or whatever it is the Lord puts on our hearts. I think asking ourselves, what can we do to help somebody else?
And, it may not be that you are the foster parent or the adoptive parent. Look around and see, who in your parish, who in your community, who in, is doing that work, and, give them a date night, give them meal once in a while, whatever it is that can be a help to them and an encouragement too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think God will put people in our paths. I do think 21 is going to be a good comeback year in our communities, in our country, with the vaccines and with the treatments, the economy. But I also think there's going to be a lot of need because of the pandemic, people trying to get back on their feet, businesses trying to restart. I think a big need is going to be in our schools. You think about a lot of our children have lost a year of school, and, our kids are going to be okay because we have two functioning parents and we're able to kind of fill the gaps in. But there's a lot of kids that have one single parent families or haven't been able, and they're just going to be behind. And so you can see a need for churches and people to kind of fill that gap with tutoring and help. And, our schools are going to be overwhelmed. I mean, there's going to be a lot of opportunities to serve. So we can look at it in two ways. We can say, man, this stinks. This has been an awful year. Or we can say, okay, here's an opportunity for us to serve. Where can I roll up my sleeves? Where can I make a difference? What can I do?
And I think a big part of this Christmas is about choosing hope. Because some of whether that comeback happens or not is dependent on the choices we make right now. And I actually got a great piece of advice in confession earlier today. That place where you're struggling, just let Jesus go there. Receive him there. The forgiveness that you can't even comprehend. Receive Jesus there. Let him do the work. I think it's such an opportunity this Christmas.
Yeah, there really is. And I think obviously God is up to something, and he's using Christians like us to be his people in the world to do that.
This faith is for living in this world, so that we can be with him in the next. And so with that, Dan, thank you so much. This was such a joy to be able to talk to you, even if only by Zoom, and Away with Words, using online conversations for good is on your bookcase there. And the red one is The Characters of Christmas, the unlikely people caught up in the story of Jesus. And it's a really, as if you're looking for, a handbook for meditating on the Holy Family and the characters of Christmas, I highly recommend it. And so thank you for doing both of these books. Thank you for the work that you do on social media and elsewhere. And God bless you this Christmas and always.
Well, thank you, Kathryn. I appreciate all the work you do, both at National Review and your writing and your just the way that you carry yourself and on behalf of life and faith and everything else like that. So it's great to be friends and just adore National Review and adore everything that you're doing. So any way that I can be a part of that is really wonderful.
Well, thanks be to God for Bill Buckley, because as we were sharing before this this went live, we were, I think I was reading National Review when I was in the 7th grade, and a lot of us at National Review are in the same boat, and it never ceases to be amazing to be able to work at the house that Bill Buckley built.
That's right.
Well, thank you everyone for joining. I know that you have a lot of competition on your time, so I hope this was helpful to you. And please keep National Review and the National Review Institute on your computers, and we appreciate your